It was mid-December and I was 17 years old. Every year, just before Christmas week, my mom would leave on a 3-day business trip. Being an only child living with just her, I would usually spend those days alone at home. Typically, she'd leave before winter break, so I'd be in school during the day. But this year, her trip coincided with the start of our holiday break. The house was all mine, and I was looking forward to relaxing indoors. A snowstorm had rolled into the city, making it impossible to leave the house anyway. I made some of the food my mum had left for me and settled down with a new movie. The storm's intensity kept disrupting my focus. The wind howled and the snow whipped against the windows, forcing me to pause the movie several times. Each time I glanced outside, the weather seemed to grow worse. Around evening, maybe 7 or 8, I heard someone approaching the front door. The sound of footsteps crunching through the snow was unmistakable, accompanied by faint coughing. They moved slowly, almost hesitantly, up to the porch. I paused the movie and waited, expecting them to knock or ring the doorbell. Minutes passed, but nothing happened. Feeling uneasy, I approached the door and peeked outside. To my surprise, no one was there. Yet, fresh footprints led up to the porch and then back the way they came. I was baffled. I clearly heard someone walk up, but I hadn't heard them leave. Considering the heavy snowstorm, I couldn't fathom why anyone would visit my house and then vanish without a trace. I convinced myself it might have been a neighbor who mistakenly came to the wrong house and quietly left. As the evening wore on, the storm grew fiercer. The power flickered and went out a few times, leaving me in darkness for minutes before it returned. Unable to watch TV, I lounged on the couch, scrolling through my phone. Close to 11 p.m., I heard a loud thump against the side of the house. At first, I dismissed it as the wind, but shortly after, the power went out again. This time, I decided to investigate. Grabbing my phone for light, I headed toward the kitchen, where I thought the sound had come from. I scanned the area but saw nothing unusual and started to walk away. "Hey!" a voice called out. Startled, I turned toward the back door. A man stood on the other side, barely visible in the dim light. His face was pressed against the glass, and his breath fogged it slightly. "Hey kid, would you open the door? It's freezing out here," he said, his voice rough. He tried the handle, but it was locked. My heart pounded as I stared at him, unsure of what to do. "Kid, come on, open the door," he repeated, his tone growing impatient. Something about him felt wrong. I started backing away slowly, my instincts screaming at me not to let him in. The man's expression darkened and he yelled, "Open the door!" His fist slammed against the glass, rattling the frame. Panicking, I grabbed my phone and hid in the hallway. I tried calling 911, but the storm had weakened the signal. After several failed attempts, I finally got through and managed to report the situation. Meanwhile, the man kept banging on the door, shouting incoherently. Then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, he ran off into the storm. The police didn't arrive until 30 minutes later, likely delayed by the severe weather. I recounted everything to them and called my mum to let her know what had happened. The officers found no trace of the man, and we were left to speculate. Had he been someone in genuine need, or was he trying to manipulate me into letting him in? I never saw him again after that night, but the memory of his face and the pounding on the door still haunt me. I had just visited my family for the holidays and was driving back home. The trip was about 10 hours in total, and while I split it into 2 drives on the way up, I decided to tackle it all in one go on the way back. Things started off fine, but halfway through it began to snow lightly. At first it didn't seem like a big deal, so I kept driving. As the hours went by, the snow got heavier, and by the time I was 3 hours from home, it was coming down hard. To make matters worse, the sun was setting, and driving conditions became even more challenging. The roads were almost completely deserted, which made me nervous but also gave me hope that I could push through and make it home that night. Not long after nightfall, about 30 minutes past the last town I'd driven through, I noticed a car up ahead. Its headlights were the only light cutting through the thick snow, but the car wasn't moving. As I got closer, I saw that it was sideways in the road with its hazard lights blinking. A man was standing next to it in the freezing cold. I didn't want to stop. It was snowing heavily, and I was eager to get home. But the car was blocking most of the road, so I had no choice. I pulled up behind him and he immediately started waving at me. He walked over to my window as I rolled it down a crack. "My car slid and got stuck. Can you help me push it out?" he said in broken English. I was hesitant, but I figured helping him would get me back on the road faster, so I agreed. I put on my hat and gloves, stepped out of the car, and was immediately hit by the freezing wind and snow. It stung my face and made me question why this guy didn't just call for help instead of standing out here in the cold. Still, I hurried to the back of his car, hoping to get this over with quickly. The man said he needed to grab his gloves and leaned into the front seat of his car. I waited behind the car, shivering, but after a moment I thought I heard him talking. It sounded like he was having a conversation. Curious and a bit uneasy, I asked when he came back, "Were you talking to me?" He looked startled but quickly smiled and said, "No, just talking to myself." Something about his answer didn't sit right with me. The way he acted and the whole situation suddenly felt off. If he was alone, who was he talking to? And if there was someone else in the car, why was he asking me for help? Before I could think too much about it, I realized he was staring at me. His smile was gone, and his eyes looked cold and empty, almost lifeless. The shift in his demeanor sent chills down my spine, and I instinctively started backing away toward my car. Suddenly, I heard car doors opening, and before I could react, 3 more men got out of his car and started rushing toward me. My heart dropped. I spun around and ran for my car, thankful I had left the engine running. I jumped into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and threw the car into drive. One of the men was so close, I almost hit him as I sped off. The road was narrow, and I was terrified I'd get stuck in the snow, but I managed to swerve around their car and get away. My hands were shaking as I drove to the next town, where I reported the incident to the police. They took my statement, but I never heard any updates. I can only assume those men weren't actually stuck and had something far worse in mind. To this day, I can't stop wondering what might have happened if I had stayed even a minute longer. Last year, in late November, the first snowfall of the season began. It wasn't supposed to be much, just a couple of inches. I got home from work around 8 p.m, and by that time, the snow had already started falling. I heated up some leftover pizza and stayed downstairs for a couple of hours, enjoying the quiet evening. Around 10 p.m, I went upstairs to my bedroom and sat at my desk with my laptop. Just as I was about to open something to watch, I heard a noise directly above me. It was a loud thud coming from the ceiling. At first, I thought it was the snow on the roof, maybe getting heavy in some spots. This was my first winter in the house, and it wasn't in the best condition, so I was a little worried about leaks or other issues. I tried not to dwell on it and focused on finding something to watch. But then it happened again. A thud, this time louder, followed by more thuds moving in a straight line across the ceiling. My worry turned into real concern. I grabbed my winter jacket and rushed outside to take a look. When I stepped out and looked at the roof, something strange caught my eye. On the side of the roof above my bedroom, all the snow was gone, leaving it completely bare. The snow had slid off and formed a pile in front of the house. I checked the other side of the roof and the snow was still there, untouched. I also glanced at my neighbors' houses, and their roofs still had snow on them too. It didn't seem natural for just one side of my roof to be clear. I started to think that whatever caused the noise might have been responsible. Shivering from the cold, I decided to go back inside. As I opened the front door and stepped in, I stopped in my tracks. My heart almost skipped a beat. There were puddles of water on the floor, stretching across the hallway. Looking closer, I saw the water continue through the living room and even up the stairs. My stomach dropped when I spotted a boot print in one of the puddles. Panic set in. I turned around and rushed back outside, slamming the door behind me. Standing by the road, I called the police, trying to explain what had happened while shaking from the cold and fear. About 30 seconds into the call, I saw something move. My bedroom window lit up with movement, and then I saw it, a figure standing behind the glass, staring down at me. They stayed there for just a moment before backing away and disappearing into the shadows. I didn't see anything else while I waited for the police to arrive, but my mind was racing, piecing together what might have happened. Someone had climbed onto the roof, walking across it and causing the snow to slide off. There were several windows they could have gotten in through, and I realized I hadn't checked to make sure they were locked. When the police arrived, they searched the house but didn't find anyone inside. However, they confirmed my theory. Trees around the house made it easy for someone to climb onto the roof, and my windows were accessible. It seemed like the intruder picked my house simply because it was an easy target. What unsettled me the most was that nothing was stolen. The boot prints went through every room, almost like they were looking for me. It hit me that I must have gone outside to check the roof at the exact moment they entered the house. If I had stayed inside just a little longer, I might have come face to face with them. If I had gone back inside sooner, I might not have noticed the tracks until it was too late. It's been almost a year since that night, and nothing else has happened. Maybe it was just a one-time attempt, but I'll never forget the feeling of not knowing what could have happened if things had played out differently. I still don't feel entirely safe, and I'm not sure I ever will. For 23 years, I've been plowing snow-covered roads in northern Minnesota, and I've never experienced a winter like this one. The storm we faced 3 weeks ago wasn't just about bad weather. It showed me how quickly people can turn on each other when desperation takes over. I work for the county, running the night shift to clear rural roads outside of town. It's usually quiet work, just me, the plow, and the radio. Occasionally, I help stuck drivers or deal with frustrated residents asking why their road hasn't been cleared yet. But mostly, it's routine. The storm started on a Tuesday afternoon. The weather service predicted about 8 inches of snow, nothing unusual, but by midnight over 20 inches had fallen, and the snow kept coming. The wind turned fierce, creating whiteout conditions. The chief told most drivers to head home. It was too dangerous to stay out, but I knew people were still out there, trying to get home. Around 2 a.m., I got a call about a stranded car on County Road 23, about 12 miles outside town. It was a middle-aged couple trying to reach their daughter, who was in labor. They had ignored the travel warnings thinking their SUV could handle the storm, but now they were stuck in a snowdrift, running low on gas. I told dispatch I'd go check it out. The snow was coming down so hard that I could only see about 10 feet ahead with my plow lights. It took nearly an hour to cover just 6 miles. As I drove, I noticed headlights behind me. At first, I thought it was another plow, but the vehicle was moving too fast for these conditions. When it got closer, I saw it was a pickup truck, following closely in my plow's cleared path. That's not unusual during storms, but the way they stayed so close didn't feel right. I found the stranded SUV where dispatch said it would be. But the couple wasn't alone. 3 other vehicles were there too, all stuck in the cleared path. 7 or 8 people were standing outside arguing. The couple had called friends with 4-wheel drives for help, but now those vehicles were stuck too, blocking the road. Everyone was shouting about who should get helped first. The pickup truck that had been following me pulled up, and 2 men got out joining the argument. That's when things got tense. One man yelled about needing to get home to his kids, another about his mother's oxygen machine needing power. Everyone had an emergency, and everyone wanted help first. I saw someone shove the pregnant woman's father, and he slipped on the ice. I called for backup, but with the storm getting worse, I knew it would take a while for help to arrive. The people were scared, cold, and angry. Years ago, I think they would have worked together to figure something out. But now, people seem quicker to turn on each other. I managed to get the pregnant woman and her husband into my plow truck, telling everyone else to return to their vehicles. One man refused and tried climbing into my truck's cab, insisting his emergency was just as important. I had to threaten to call the state police before he finally backed off. The couple's daughter was born safe in the hospital the next morning. The storm dumped 32 inches of snow before it was over. We eventually found all the stranded vehicles, and thankfully everyone survived. But I can't stop thinking about how quickly things turned chaotic. Fear made those people forget about helping each other. Now, when I'm on my night shift, I carry extra supplies, blankets, food, and a first aid kit. Not just for stranded drivers, but for when desperation sets in and people start turning on each other. Because sometimes the real danger isn't the storm. It's what fear does to people when they think no one is coming to help. Just last week, during another storm, I saw that same pickup truck following a different plow. Later, I heard reports of stranded motorists having their supplies stolen by someone in a truck matching that description. Some people are taking advantage of the bad weather, using plowed paths to find victims. I've made a new rule. I don't stop for groups of vehicles anymore, no matter how urgent the emergency seems. Call me cold, but I've seen what happens when desperate people think you're their last chance. In my 23 years on the job, the storms haven't gotten much worse, but the people have. Some of my co-workers think I'm paranoid, that I should trust people more, but they weren't there that night. They didn't watch neighbors turn on each other over who deserved help first. They haven't seen how thin the line is between order and chaos. I'll keep plowing through the night, clearing roads and helping where I can. But I'm more cautious now about who I stop for and who I trust. Because in the end, it's not the snow or the cold that makes winter dangerous. It's how some people use it as an excuse to show who they really are. Running an ice fishing rental business in northern Michigan isn't the kind of job that will make you rich quickly, but it paid the bills. I had 10 heated shacks set up on Lake Mitchell, mostly rented by weekend adventurers and tourists, looking for an authentic winter experience. Everything was fine until I rented Shack 7 to a man named John Anderson. Anderson wasn't like my usual customers. He didn't bring any fishing gear, just a laptop and what he called research equipment. He paid for a whole month up front and specifically asked for the shack farthest away from the others. He claimed to be studying winter fish migration patterns for a university. Looking back, I should have checked his credentials. The first strange thing I noticed was his schedule. Most ice fishermen arrive at dawn, but Anderson only came after dark. He worked all night and left before sunrise. I thought maybe he was studying nocturnal fish, and since he wasn't causing any trouble, I didn't question it. Then complaints started coming in. Clients in the nearby shacks reported hearing strange noises at night. They said it wasn't the usual lake sounds, but something mechanical, like power tools. When I checked Shack 7 during the day, everything seemed normal. However, I noticed odd holes in the ice. They weren't made by any auger I'd ever seen. Too wide, with strange marks around the edges. Last Tuesday, Anderson called me at midnight, saying his heater wasn't working and needed to be fixed immediately. We'd been having a warm spell, which made the ice conditions tricky, but he insisted it was urgent. When I arrived, I realized his research equipment wasn't for environmental monitoring as he had claimed. It looked more like heavy-duty sonar and diving gear. Anderson seemed nervous, constantly checking his phone. He started talking about how he'd found something in the lake, something important. He rambled about shipments, drop points, and how certain people would pay a lot of money to recover things from under the ice. That's when we saw headlights in the distance. 3 snowmobiles were speeding across the lake toward us. Anderson panicked, saying they weren't supposed to come that night, and the ice was too thin. He scrambled to gather his equipment, but it was too heavy. Then we heard it, the deep, echoing crack of the ice breaking. The snowmobiles kept coming closer, and the ice gave way. Everything happened so fast. Anderson and most of his equipment plunged into the freezing water. I managed to grab him with my rescue pole, but he refused to let go of a waterproof case he was holding. The extra weight nearly pulled us both under. The snowmobiles turned back when they heard his screams. I pulled him out, but he was already suffering from hypothermia. I called 911 and reported it as a fishing accident. As the paramedics took him away, he kept mumbling about something still being down there. The police searched the lake the next day and found a sealed package stuck in the lake bed right below Shack 7. They didn't share much information, but I overheard enough from the dive team to understand what was happening. Anderson wasn't studying fish at all. He was searching for old drug drops. It turns out cartels had been using the lake for years, dropping packages through the ice in winter and retrieving them in summer. The police closed my business for 2 weeks to investigate. They found 3 more packages scattered across the lake bed. Anderson wasn't even his real name, and the university had never heard of his supposed research project. I reopened my business last week, but the police made me move all the shacks to a different part of the lake. My regular clients still come, but things feel different now. Every time I hear the ice shifting at night, I wonder what else is down there, what secrets the lake is hiding. I've changed the way I run my business. No more long-term rentals and no more solo fishermen. When people ask about Shack 7, I just tell them it's under maintenance. Some things are better left frozen under the ice. The strangest part? Last night, I saw snowmobile lights out on the lake again. They circled the spot where Shack 7 used to be, and then disappeared into the darkness. This morning, I found a business card stuck to my office door. It was blank except for a phone number and a dollar amount with a lot of zeros. I tore it up, but I know more people like Anderson will come. They always talk when they get caught. They tell others about the quiet lake with the helpful rental owner, the perfect place to hide things nobody is supposed to find. I've started looking for other jobs, maybe somewhere away from the lakes, because sooner or later, someone else will show up with too much cash and too many questions. Next time, they might not take no for an answer. The lake keeps its secrets well. It's the people you have to worry about.